All right, another week in the NFL proving once again why we both love and hate playing fantasy football. But is it time to panic on these guys for the rest of the fantasy season? Let's get into our panics for week 3. Okay, first up, Colts quarterback Anthony Richardson. Richardson, back-to-back dismal performances, only 7.08 points in week 3 against the Chicago Bears, and he was just bad, man. 10 of 20 for only 167 yards, only has 24 yards on the ground on 8 carries, throws 2 interceptions, and this offense for Indianapolis just looks really, really bad. We talked about the Richardson roller coaster going into the season. Has a monster week 1, 27 points, but then not a very good week 2 with 12.86. But this is just the bad for Anthony Richardson. And I was very, very cautious and not optimistic on Anthony Richardson. Only started 4 games last year, and he really wasn't that good in them. Like, he had a couple of moments. He couldn't finish half of them. And anybody can be good in this league for 4 starts at quarterback. But once teams get tape on you, what you like to do, what your tendencies are, and defensive coaches make adjustments, life gets really difficult really fast. And Anthony Richardson just hasn't played enough games. He started only 13 games in college. He started 4 games last year. He's got 3 starts under his belt this year. It's just not enough reps for him. And his inaccuracy was a real issue. I mean, we're looking at an NFL where guys' completion percentages are in the high 60s to 70+%, and Richardson at 50% as his max the last 2 weeks and under 50% in week 1. It's just not sustainable long term. He's got to rely on his rushing to get his points, and I'm just not seeing enough of it. I mean, teams are doing a good job keeping him contained, not letting him get any sort of explosive big plays, and Richardson looks a little apprehensive, not wanting to risk more injury. I'm hopping off the Richardson bandwagon. Like I said, it's a roller coaster. I don't want any more parts of it. I'm putting the Richardson panic meter right now at a 7.9. It's getting pretty high up there. I'm not sure I'm willing to risk starting him as my quarterback moving forward. Okay, Ravens tight end Mark Andrews was on the list last week, and he's on the list again this week. Things are getting really, really bad. Now, the Ravens had a pretty good offensive day today against Dallas. Now, it wasn't great in the fourth quarter. They let Dallas come back, but they had a big 28-6 lead, and they were pounding the rock. Didn't really throw the ball too much, but Mark Andrews had just 1 target today, 0 receptions. He put up a goose egg. This is a guy that was getting drafted as the 3rd, 4th, maybe even 2nd tight end off the board in some leagues. People were expecting a monster year from Mark Andrews coming back from that injury he sustained last year, and he's just been really a letdown. 3.4 points in the opener, an okay 9.1 last week, but a devastating goose egg in your tight end slot. And like I said, the offense really hasn't been focusing on him. We've seen Isaiah Likely take more of the targets, more of the receptions from them, and they just don't throw to the tight end much anymore. Feels like it's a run-heavy offense that tries to get quick passes out to the wide receivers, Zay Flowers in particular, and I just don't know if Mark Andrews has anything left in the tank. I was pretty worried last week. It's devastating right now for me if I'm a Mark Andrews owner. I don't know if I can play him. Try to trade him. I mean, he's almost becoming cut worthy. Now, you can't really cut him because of the amount of draft capital you spent on him. And there is always an off chance that Mark Andrews finds his way back into the offense. But it's looking really, really bad. I'm putting his panic at a blistering 9.5 on the panic meter. I am very, very concerned if I'm a Mark Andrews owner. I don't know what to do with him. And I don't have Mark Andrews, so I feel bad for you guys. Okay, how about Mr. Consistent himself, Tampa Bay Buccaneers wide receiver Mike Evans, a dismal 3.7 points this week, coming off of a mediocre 7.2 the week before. Now, he had a great week 1, but that was against an awful defense. The last 2 weeks against good secondaries, I mean, Detroit surprisingly a good secondary, but this week against Patrick Surtain and the Broncos, nothing. Only 3 targets, 2 receptions, 17 yards. Obviously, no touchdown there. But this was kind of a choppy game plan to begin with. The Buccaneers really never got their offense going. It was kind of sloppy all over the place, and Mike Evans drew the tough matchup. Patrick Surtain is the best, if not the 2nd best corner in the NFL. Him or Sauce Gardner, take what you like better. He's a lockdown guy, and he's getting to a point in his career where he's a little bit older, he's past 30, and he's going to struggle to win those matchups that he would consistently win week in and week out against those elite type corners. And the other thing is his teammate Chris Godwin has emerged as probably the number one target for Baker Mayfield through the first 3 weeks of the season. Baker's love throwing to him. Godwin's done an excellent job of getting open and catching the football. And that's really hurting our man Mike Evans. He was super reliable forever. His entire career. He's been a 1,000-yard receiver every year of his career to start. And now it just feels like, I don't know, man. It feels awkward. He's got 120 yards of receiving so far through the first 3 weeks of the season. 2 touchdowns in week 1, none since then. I'd get concerned with Mike Evans, but I'm not going to panic. Like I said, this is a really tough matchup. Offense as a whole was not good for the Buccaneers. So let's see how this plays out. I think the Buccaneers are still a good offense overall. I want to see more production out of Mike Evans moving forward. I'm going to give him a warm kind of 6.2 on the panic meter. I think it's too early to write off Mr. Consistency himself, but it's something to keep an eye on if you're a Mike Evans owner. Okay, sticking with the Buccaneers, how about Buccaneers running back Rachaad White? Had a really good season last year, but there were some questioning deep analytic numbers, but we kind of ignored that because, we thought this was going to be a good offense and he's a solid running back. 16.6 points in week 1, 3.3 points last week, and 8.5 points this week. Now, the game script kind of got tossed on its head for Rachaad White this week. The Broncos didn't let Tampa Bay get anything going offensively, so he wasn't able to do much. 6 carries, only 17 yards, though. So he had 2.1, 1.8, and 2.8 yards carrying through the first 3 weeks of the season. That's abysmal. You cannot have that if you're a top-tier running back. Now, he did help a little bit in the passing game. 5 catches for only 18 yards. This was the worry with Rachaad White. His efficiency numbers were dreadful. He was one of the least efficient running backs in the NFL last year, and it's rearing its ugly head this year. Not to mention he's got another running back in Bucky Irving who seems to be taking over as their go-to guy at the running back spot. Baker Mayfield has more rushing than Rachaad White so far this season. So I am just insanely concerned if I'm a Rachaad White owner. No touchdowns so far on the season on a team that's looked really good. 37 points in week 1, a nice 20 points against a decent Lions defense. Today's kind of a bad day, but I'm just concerned with all these numbers pointing at Rachaad White. I think he might be on the way out as the Buccaneers starting running back. We might see a lot more of Bucky Irving. I'm putting Rachaad White at an 8.3 on the panic meter. I think it's getting time to be like, man, I spent a lot of high draft pick to get Rachaad White, and he is just not producing enough for me. All right, another guy who's on the list 2 weeks in a row, 49ers wide receiver Brandon Aiyuk. What's going on, Aiyuk? What are you doing, man? Now, he is getting better each and every week. It looks like 4.8 points week 1, 8.3 last week against Minnesota, 9.3 against LA, but LA secondary is really, really bad. His teammate Jawan Jennings gets a hat trick, 100 plus for him all over the place. 10 targets again for Brandon Aiyuk, but only 5 receptions. That's not good enough. He's getting the looks from Brock Purdy with Deebo Samuel, with George Kittle out this week, but he's just not, there is no connection there. He held out all of camp, didn't practice with the team, and it's starting to rear its ugly head. Again, I'm not going to over panic on Brandon Aiyuk because, like I said, we've seen production increase each and every week. But this was the week I was hoping he would break out if I'm a Brandon Aiyuk owner, which I am. I need to see more from him. We need him to get on the same page with Purdy, and we need him to get in the end zone. Now, the Niners are in a bad spot now. They dropped today's game to LA, so they're 1-2. They're going to start feeling a little bit more desperate here, and the offense could suffer from that. They're not able to establish the running game. They're forced to throw the ball. Good for targets and production, hopefully, but maybe teams just key in on that and things go out of whack for the 49ers. I'm not going to panic, really. I'm going to put them up a little bit for where I had them last week, though. I'm going to put Brandon Aiyuk at a 5.4 on the panic meter. Okay, DeAndre Swift truthers out there. This one's going to hurt. DeAndre Swift, Chicago Bears running back. It is getting bad, man. 5 points in week 1, 8.2 last week, only 6.2 points this week, but it was against a dreadful Indianapolis Colts run defense. He isn't able to do anything. 13 carries, 20 yards, 1.5. He looks washed. It's really sad. I don't know what happened to him last year, that second half of the year against Philly, but this guy is cooked, man. 2 receptions for 22 yards. It's just not good enough. And this Bears offense as a whole was much better in the second half of this Colts game, but it's still got a lot of growing pains, and they're going to focus on trying to get Caleb Williams' development. And so the run game is going to take a hit, but it's a stacked backfield. We saw Khalil Herbert and Roschon Johnson getting touches this week. Herbert, I believe, was getting those red zone touches, which you don't want if you're a fantasy owner. You want your guy getting those red zone touches to get those touchdowns. 0 touchdowns on the season for Swift. And if he couldn't do it this week, couldn't get double digits against this defense, I'm starting to think it's time to cut DeAndre Swift. It might be I can't have him on my bench taking up space because he's just not going to do anything. I got the panic meter at a 9.3 for DeAndre Swift. I think this is really, really bad if you were going to rely on him to be an impact flex guy or even a running back too if you were all in on this Bears offense. I think he might be toast as far as fantasy goes and maybe for his career. All right, even though they won today, I'm going with Broncos running back Javonte Williams. Not a very good start to the season for him. 3.3 in week 1. A nice 11.5 last week, but only 6.1 against Tampa Bay this week. And Tampa Bay's run defense has really, really struggled so far this season. But man, 5 carries, 12 yards. He's not getting the red zone touches or the goal line touches. It's just not good. Now, he did have 4 receptions for 29 yards, which helps if you're playing in a PPR spot, but I just don't think there's enough volume for a guy like Javonte Williams. We saw the Broncos kind of change up what they were doing offensively. A lot more read options, a lot more getting Bo Nix out into space, a lot more of a college offense look, and that supports the other running backs in this backfield and not so much Javonte Williams. He is 2 years removed from the knee injury, and maybe he's just never going to get it back. He was solid last year. He was excellent before he got hurt, and sometimes that just happens to guys. But I'm really starting to get concerned, not only is how many great offensive performances are we going to see from this Broncos offense, and if they do go with this new approach that they attack Tampa Bay with, he's the odd man out as far as what they're going to do and what they're trying to do offensively. And Sean Payton's got no qualms about rotating running backs and putting new guys in there because he's going to do whatever it takes to win. I'm very, very worried if I'm a Javonte Williams owner because he seemed like a really good flex RB3 on a team that he's going to get value, just churn out yards, but that just has not been the case this year. I'm putting the panic meter in an 8.9 for Javonte Williams. I think it's getting really, really dark, really, really fast. Okay, another guy on the list again is Lions tight end Sam LaPorta. He's one of the biggest fantasy disappointments so far this season. I mean, 8.5 points this week, and he got banged up, had some injuries, but look at his targets and receptions. Only 3 targets, and 2 targets through the first 3 games of the season. 3 really disappointing seasons for a guy you drafted high 3rd round, 4th round to be the tight end 1 this season. Hasn't gotten in the end zone. You know, he had a monster season, scored all those touchdowns last year. But the Lions offense has been the concern, man. They've been chunking out a ton of yards. None of it's been to the tight end, really. And they just aren't scoring touchdowns. Only 20 points again this week against a bad Cardinals defense. I mean, their offense has struggled. 20 points, 16 points, 26 points in the overtime. So 20 points in regulation. They haven't gone over 20 in any regulation so far this season. That's the biggest concern here if you're a Lions fantasy owner because all the yards are going to Montgomery and Amon-Ra and Gibbs, and none of it's going to Sam LaPorta, and definitely none of the touchdowns are the few that they have there. But I'm not going to panic just quite yet because I do have like this innate trust that the Lions are going to turn it up offensively. It's been kind of a gritty, grindy start to the season. Schedule should all open up here in a bit, but again, everyone's bringing their A game for the Lions. Things could end up getting tougher for them rather than easier like you would think. I'm only going to put my panic at a 5.1, a little bit elevated from where I was last week. The concern is starting to grow. If we see another bad week like this from LaPorta, I'm going to feel really disgusted if I spent such a high pick on him and he just isn't producing what we expected him to produce. Okay, how about Saints wide receiver Rashid Shaheed? A blistering start to the season, 16.3 and 20.9, but he throws up a goose egg today in a matchup that everyone was clamoring to start him. I know I started him in one of my leagues. I thought it was going to be a big day against an abysmal Eagles secondary. 5 targets, 0 receptions. He dropped one, probably should have had a touchdown. He wasn't able to snag it in, but I'm not going to freak out too much about this. Sometimes you just have bad games in the NFL, and Shaheed was a guy that was like boom or bust, and he'd only been boom so far, so we were due for a bust game. You just hate to see a goose egg whenever you do. But the bigger question leans more on the Saints offense. They only put up 12 points today against a Philly defense who struggled mightily all of last season, has struggled so far this season. I think, maybe the Saints offense were frauds. I wasn't a full believer in the Saints, man. Both back-to-back 40-point games. I thought there were some extenuating circumstances through those first 2 weeks, and today really kind of just screams alarm bells. But I'm not going to freak out too much with Shaheed. It is only one down week. If we see another down week with the Saints offense after putting things on film, then we can start hitting the panic button for all our Saints wide receivers and stuff like that. But, they got Chris Olave involved. He hadn't been involved so far this year. So I think that could just be something like that. And the Eagles just weren't allowing Shaheed to hit them over the top for those massive plays. I'm going to put my panic at only a 3.7. Not too worried about him right now. We're just going to keep our eye on what the Saints are going to do moving forward. Okay, finally, Raiders running back Zamir White. Oh my good Lord. I was all in on the White hype train. I thought he was going to be a really solid back for this Raiders offense. But the Raiders can't run the football. They just cannot run the football. 4.6 points week 1, 6.8, and then 3.4 points this week against a dreadful Carolina Panthers defense, and the Raiders lose on top of it. But 10 carries for 34 yards. That's not great, man. 0 in the passing game. Alexander Mattison is getting all those passing downs and those receptions. But the Raiders just flat out cannot run the football. It's crazy that this team has no really problems throwing the ball, but they just can't get anything going. Now, they did get down early against the Panthers, and they were kind of chasing all game. But this was the game. If we weren't going to see a nice performance from Zamir White, I think he's definitely droppable now. If I'm a Zamir White owner, I don't think I could keep him on my roster. He's just taking up space, and he's just not involved enough. And they don't do anything. No touchdowns on the year. He's not in the passing game. They can't run the ball. And the Raiders, I don't know what the Raiders are. Are they good? Are they bad? But for me, Zamir White's peaking out this panic meter. I'm at a 9.8. This is about as much panic I would have if I was an owner of a player. I think you got to cut him. I don't think it's too drastic to say cut Zamir White, move on from him, try and add somebody else on your bench to try and figure it out, because you can't start him. He's not a start any week. Almost, your entire team has to be on the IR if you're thinking about starting Zamir White moving forward. What a disaster. All right, our bonus one. How about the Miami Dolphins? The entire Dolphins, my man Devon A-Chain, Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill, hit the panic button. We're at 11. We're at 11 out of 10 on the panic meter for the Miami Dolphins. Skylar Thompson is an abysmal quarterback. He is absolute crap. He is terrible. They can't do anything with him. They couldn't run the ball against Seattle today. He couldn't get the ball out to his guys. It was just all sorts of stuff. And then Thompson goes down and we got Tim Boyle at quarterback. What is happening here? We had 4th and 3, 4th and 2, and none of these 3 guys are even touching the ball. We're going to Braxton Berrios. Mike McDaniels might be cooked as a play caller. People might have figured out this offense. The defense is dreadful, and the quarterback play is abysmal. I am freaking out right now if I have any of these 3 guys. You have to tear them down again. Waddle's a questionable flex play. Our A-Chain's an RB2 potentially. Maybe some weeks they'll have some success running the ball, but if teams know you can't pass, they're going to put 10 dudes in the box to try and stop A-Chain. And I don't know if Mike McDaniel is creative enough to get his guys the balls in the space that's needed for them to go take advantage of their speed, because it's looked really bad offensively through the first 3 weeks. And Tyreek Hill, whereabouts unknown. Teams are just not letting Tyreek beat them over the top, and they're not letting him beat them underneath. I am freaking out if I'm owning any Dolphins players. You spent a lot of draft capital on them, and it's getting grim real fast. But that's going to do it for us today. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I'll be here to answer all of your questions. Who are you freaking out on? Who did I miss? What are you doing out there? What kind of moves are you going to make to fix your roster? Again, if you haven't already, drop a quick like on this video, subscribe to the channel. We got daily fantasy content for you guys, all the content you could possibly need to win your matchups each and every week. We got start sits for running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, quarterbacks, every single matchup, the waiver wire acquisitions, who to target in the waivers, guys you should try and trade for, boom bust. We got all of that here in one excellent place, so make sure you're subscribed. Again, like, subscribe, and share, and I'll see y'all tomorrow.